This, my friends, is my freeze ray, which, with the addition of the wonderflonium I obtained at my famously successful heist last week, I say successful in that I achieved my objective. It was less successful in that I inadvertently introduced my arch nemesis to the girl of my dreams, and now he's taking her out on dates, and they're probably going to French kiss or something. She called him sweet? How is he sweet?
Hello, listening people.
Hello.
Hi, Bartek. How are you?
I'm good, Ryan. How are you?
I am doing foolishly. That's how I'm doing, because
You're being a fool in this autumnal month of April?
For us, it's an autumnal month. For other people in the world, it's a spring.
For the fake countries in the world, yes.
It's
For the
springtime.
fake hemisphere.
If you want to hear our thoughts and our takes on the producers, we already did that. You can listen to that, because that's springtime for Hitler, famously. But we're here today, Bartek, to be spitting and Polish, of course. Isn't that right?
How about slurping up and dirtying? Because we're April Fools.
Ooh, and we're Russian secretly. That's the twist. It's like you thought Slawinski and Bartek were Polish names. No.
Oh, I thought we were Czech.
Oh, that's it. We're Czech. There's what you described Czech as sounds like, what was it? Dumb Polish?
No, it's silly Polish.
Silly. That should make the Czechs feel better listening. Oh, he said dumb, but he actually said silly, so that makes me feel better about my own language.
Well, look, I'll give a sincere message to all the Czechs listening. Get over it.
Check, please. But no, in all seriousness, we're here doing our show Pictures Powwow, in which we talk about a movie that came recommended. I recommended the film, as it is my turn to select. Next episode will be the listening people's, and then the one after that will be you again, Bartek. And I picked a project that did not fit a category on the podcast that we do on this show. We used to have 3 shows primarily at one point in time, but we've only just been doing this because life. People, you know what's happening in the world. And
the virus.
Oh no, I meant the war. No. Just life's been hectic, right? So we're doing Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog, which was an internet project, series, film thing.
I think we can call it a web show.
A web show that was released in 2008, if I am not mistaken. And this isn't a film per se in the way that we usually on this show, Pictures Powwow, we talk about films. On Televisual Event, we talk about TV shows. And on Mystery Box, we talk about random things that we don't know. That honestly, if none of us knew what this was and was put in the Mystery Box, it would actually be put. But I do know what this is, and it's too good for the Mystery Box. So this is a weird one where I feel as if I've broken the rules, because this is an internet thing that was broken up into 3 parts and released in 3 parts. Because the creators of this were wanting to create something during the infamous writers' strike in 2007-2008 period of time that affected so much in the industry. There's so many projects that never got made, so many TV shows and movies that were altered, such as Scrubs. Did you ever watch Scrubs?
No.
There was a season, I do believe, of Scrubs that was written by non-union writers or people who didn't write for the show, and people love or hate that season. There's an actual episode in there that I actually like, in which one of the main characters retires, and you kind of get a flashback of what their life was and how they became who they are, and I actually like that. People don't like that. I actually like that episode, but that's a point that we can put to the side for the moment. So we're doing Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog, which is a movie, but it's also a web series. It's also an Emmy Award-winning mini-series.
An Emmy is for TV shows.
Which is for TV shows, and it's in magazines. It's like the best TV show and it's not a TV show because it's an internet thing. But let's barrel forward. Bartek, what is your journey, history, and experience with Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog?
I definitely heard of it at the time. It would have been 2008 or 2009 that I'd heard of it. If we dial back to an episode we did last year, it was the episode on Brick. I mentioned that I watched that film in my either year 9 or year 10 media class at my school. And in that exact same class, the teacher, he had written a review for Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog.
Okay.
And It was because we were all going to be doing like a, writing a review for a film. And so the example that he showed us of one that he made was for Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog. And I don't remember too many details about that review, but I did remember hearing the detail of like, oh, this is a web show that's been uploaded online. It's not a movie or a TV show or anything like that. It stars Neil Patrick Harris. It sounded like a comedy musical to me, and it's just always in the back of my head of like, oh, that's the thing that Mr. Perry wrote a review on. That was like a web show or something like that.
Yeah, I remember very vividly going to my sister's place when my sister had moved out of home, was in university, was living up in a town different to ours that's like 3.5 hours away. We went to go visit my sister, and they had on their computer they had Dr. Horrible, and it was broken up into the 3 separate parts, and they wanted to show us this, and this was in the early days in which we were just watching random things on the internet. Remember those days where it's like, Charlie the Unicorn and Fred and the Annoying Orange and Red versus Blue, and there was all these
early web shows or web video shows.
Or uploading of real shows but minus the context. Like when I grew up, Old Greg, which is from the Mighty Boosh, was an internet phenomenon.
Yeah,
but people rarely remember back then. They didn't even know. I didn't know for the longest time that it was from a television show.
Same here,
because it was so internet-y.
I was visiting a friend. He's like, "Oh, do you know Old Greg?" And he showed me it. I'm like, "Oh, okay, this is like a weird internet video." And,
no.
And then later on, there was a show called The Mighty Boosh, and that's what it was from.
And it was a part of an episode.
Yeah.
So there would be that, or weird animations such as salad fingers, and so we would be seeing all of these things. And my sister was very keen on this because they're a big Buffy fan, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and we also enjoyed Firefly, which is relevant because the lead actor in Firefly plays Captain Hammer in this, Nathan Fillion.
Yep.
And so we were all a bit excited, and we also like musicals, so we've covered a few on the show at this point, and I like music, and so we sat down to watch it on my sister's bed on her computer over there, and we sat and watched it and went to the next part and the next part, and thoroughly enjoyed it. I remember having tears in my eyes laughing at certain jokes in this. It was such a refreshing thing, and I can't wait to get your perspective on internet media as well, in terms of, I remember so viscerally thinking to myself, you can do this on the internet? Like, you can upload something of this production quality, like of this level of quality with real actors, and you could do that?
Yeah, it's very much that whole mentality of like, hey, if someone can, make a movie with a super low budget that looks like this, why can't you?
Yeah, but very much for back then, it was so weird to think that something like this, which you could see being a real TV or even expanded out to a real movie thing, idea and people behind it and the quality of it, that can be on the internet? That was such a strange thing to me, because I was so used to things like Red versus Blue, where they took a pre-existing thing and they created something out of it themselves.
Like the machinima style.
Yeah, or Fred, where it was like some guy and he sped up his voice and he wrote some weird dark shit in there. I was so used to internet creation being that, and so the idea that you could actually make a story with characters, with beginning, middles, and end, with an actual production and a musical and all of this stuff was so abstract to me at the time, and it blew my mind. It blew my mind that you could do this, honestly. What do you think about that whole entire thing? And did you have anything like that back in the day when you were watching things on the internet, where you had that kind of one thing that really woke something to you about what one could actually do on the internet?
Well, definitely my understanding of, like internet produced content, in the mid 2000s would have been more along the lines of like, hey, there are people that make like, comedy animations. Like I typically group it under like the Newgrounds stuff.
Yeah.
That's where you get your like Metal Gear Awesome and things
That's
like
that.
That's
where Donkey came from, technically.
And also the Yoshi parade or whatever he called it.
Yeah.
And then you also, for the more live action stuff, it would usually be like skits or blogs or something like that.
Yeah.
I guess for me, one of the first ones that it didn't really so much blow my mind in terms of, like, oh, this is something you can do, but it's like, oh, this actually is, there's something to it. And I know you're not too big on it, but like when I started watching videos about people like reviewing games or like doing let's plays of them, it was like, oh, there is actually something to taking a product that you didn't make and making some sort of entertainment around that, or simply playing through it and talking about it as if like you're reliving experiences, sharing it with someone who's not there. Like there is, there's more that you can do than just animations and skits, which I don't want to phrase it in such a way that it sounds like, that's low effort stuff.
No,
but
it isn't.
But as a viewer, it's just like, oh, this was produced, now I can watch it, and then that's going to be the few-minute journey.
And that was the market of what was on the internet. There was those, the like cute animal videos, or your weird sketch comedy stuff. Smosh existed at some point.
Yeah, they were the big ones.
And you had, people making videos about already existing things, like what if Pokemon was real, and you had sketches of that variety growing up. But yeah, I get what you're saying though. There was definite internet media that was emerging at the time, like your Let's Plays or even reviewers. My YouTube primarily, I watch review content, and I remember seeing, unfortunately but also fortunately, the Nostalgia Critic and those of his ilk reviewing content that they wanted to do. It wasn't just new movies or classics. It could be dumb kids movies or obscure cult movies or whatever. And that idea that a person who isn't like a professional film critic, who is a journalist in the paper or has been doing it for decades, can just sit down and review something was also eye-opening.
Yeah, and I know that you know me, I used to be, huge into like Cinema Snob. That was, I remember, one of the, even though that was like, later down the line a bit, like 2010, 2011, 2012, where I expanded out of just like the produced videos that he made to more like the reviews, like the midnight screenings, he called it, where he just comes out of the cinema with his friends and like just the friends shooting the shit thing. It almost felt like this illusion, that illusion of like, these people are not your friends, but I almost felt like, oh man, but I see them interacting as friends. I almost feel like I do know them, like little quirks. And yeah, it's interesting.
And then there's Red Letter Media, who even today, it feels as if they go beyond the effort that one should. They have good production. They're a production company that happens to make reviews and video essays, and they really, yes, but to get back to Dr. Horrible here, I saw that and it really, wow, you can do what you would traditionally be seen in other mediums for the internet. Oh, wow. But then I also remembered why this was made. I was very vividly aware of the writer's strike happening because it was affecting TV shows that I liked. And so I understood why this was made. This was made because it was a bit of fun. They shot it in 6 days. They did all this stuff. It was a rush thing, but it was like how we know with being creatives, it's a bunch of people getting together, wanting to create something in a limited space of time with restrictions, and they just did it. And here it is, and we can talk about it and watch it. And they put it on the internet because it was the place where they could put it out there. And I remember that was the context. So it was also this sensation of this being an outlier for things. This wasn't going to be a standard that I would ever see on the internet. And I've been proven right and wrong on that in ways as well. But yeah, that's kind of my ride with it. Tell me, what was your experience with watching Dr. Horrible? I mean, I was actually a bit shocked to hear that you actually knew some bits and bobs about it, because I had forgotten any of that kind of stuff. I thought this was going to be yet another one of those, here's a strange thing I've thrown at Bartek.
Well, definitely strange in the sense that, like, what I mentioned about, like, the review and the little things that I kept in my mind basically was the extent of it. Like, you might remember I mentioned, like, oh, it was just some little comedy musical kind of thing. In fact, I didn't even register, like, so much it is a musical. I only really got that from the title. Like, I don't remember him mentioning the review, but it's like, oh, well, they must sing in it. I didn't know if it was, like, going to be an entirely singing thing or if it was just going to be more like what it is,
Yeah,
like
traditional musical rather than kind of like an opera style where it's every word is sung.
Yes. So I watched it last night once, and because I had time, I actually rewatched it this morning because there were just a bunch of things that when I was reading up about it, I'm like, I think I need to give this another shot. I think I also did have that classic thing of like, because I had different expectations the first time round, a lot of things went over my head, and it is, much shorter, so I'll watch it again. And definitely I benefited from the second viewing.
Okay, so what was the first viewing like?
The first viewing, I guess I was thinking more along the lines of, oh, this is gonna just be a really silly comedy the whole way through. This main character's values as a villain are kind of gonna be
Silly?
silly, more staple, more. I don't want to use the word generic, but like traditional or cookie cutter. It's a good one. Tropey, and it's not going to matter as much. What actually matters is going to be like, you know, all the interactions and stuff. And I think it wasn't until he was talking with his moist buddy about how, you know, I don't kill people. That's not my style. That I started realizing like, oh, okay, there is actually a bit more depth to this. And then obviously the ending being a tragedy really kind of flipped all that. So I'm like, oh, okay, I wasn't expecting this. Yeah. And so yeah, we've done multiple reviews on Pictures Powwow where I'm like, oh yeah, you know, I think I could really benefit from a second viewing. And this is one time where I actually did do one beforehand.
Yeah, I'm glad to hear it. So you were more caught off guard with how it presented itself and then how it ended itself. This slow unraveling of this isn't just a goofy comedy that's just taken the piss and been fluffy. It's actually got more layers to it, and it is in fact a tragedy.
Yeah, I knew that it was going to be like a high effort thing, but in terms of the tone and where it was going, things like that, that I was underestimating it.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I had a great time rewatching this. I've watched this many times over the years. I listened to the soundtrack of it. I enjoy the music from this quite a lot. I've had one of the songs as an alarm clock at points in my life. The Freeze Ray song. It's a great one to wake you up. You know,
well, it is one of the first ones in the thing.
Yeah, and it's a slow building up one. I mean, there are some songs you can't have that wake you up in the morning, right?
I cannot believe my eyes. Yeah.
That one's fine, I guess. No, everybody's here in their own way, but no, I enjoy this, but I was very curious because I haven't watched it in a little while. And I wanted to look at this again with you, who I assumed had not seen or heard much about it. I wanted to look at it in the landscape of where we are now, because this came out at a certain period of time, and superhero media has changed, musicals have changed. This type of thing doesn't exist, really, and Joss Whedon, the perspective of him has changed very much so. The creator, one of the creators of this, the darling child, and also just the humor. I wanted to see how the humor fits with today's standards. And I also liked to go back to the internet thing about this, to look back on pieces of media created on the internet and looking at them and seeing why this doesn't work nowadays, why this doesn't happen nowadays. And although this is more of a Hollywood thing put on the internet, there is this one element that I find so fascinating faded away on the internet, which is using the vlogging, blogging, usual formats that YouTube uses to convey a story. That existed for a little period of time. There was obviously Boxy, the famous Boxy, one of the first people to ever get doxxed. No, there was Boxy. She did her thing early on, and then there was stuff later on. There was ARGs that played around with the vlogging format. There was people who would take classic stories like Pride and Prejudice and Frankenstein and would make them be told in a modern vlogging format like the Lizzie Bennet Diaries. And I always found that to be, that's an interesting way to do things. You're taking what is an emerging piece of storytelling, which is the vlog format, which was a very big thing about YouTube, right? That there's anyone, they could plonk down a camera and they could just talk about their day-to-day life. And I always found that interesting. And so you have this here that reminded me of that, what feels like it was a 6 to 7 year time period in which that was a viable way on the internet to frame and structure and tell a story. And I wanted to kind of have a look back at that again and see if it holds up on a rewatch all these years later, or if it feels too awkward and cringy and dated, because there's obviously that thing too of there's always going to be, is this dated now? Like, whenever you have one of those I'm hip and with it type of things, you go back and it's like hella cringe.
It's definitely part of the comedy in the blog sections are, light cringe comedy. It's not too strong, but it's very realistic. You don't have the, as I call it, the cat hammock music or the cuts in the middle of a sentence or anything like that.
No. So yeah, let's just walk through this, buddy. So you had to watch this twice, so just kind of talk to me about it. Tell me stuff you liked, didn't like, your general kind of going through characters. I just want to hear from you because, like you said, you watched this a second time. I'm a bit surprised to hear that as well, but it is short and sweet. So yeah, just walk me through your kind of experience with this.
Sure. I should say right off the bat that I didn't really have any big laughs. Was mostly in it just watching it for the story, but then there were definitely like little lines of like, oh, that was a good one. In most of like the actual blog stuff, which isn't actually that, prominent throughout the whole thing, maybe a little less than half of it is kind of in that blog format. Neil Patrick Harris definitely nailed that. Like just the awkwardness, it feels very natural. Just like thinking of something to add on, like, oh, and by the way, there were kids at the park, just like little things like that. It's like, oh yeah, this feels real. This feels like, this awkward character would do something like that.
Sarcasm, how original. Just got to brushes off, just keeps going, yeah.
Yeah, and definitely because you're not cutting away during this constantly, you feel the awkwardness, and yeah, you really get a sense of this character. And then you get to the first song, and you know what? I'd always heard that he was a good singer. I think the only thing I can remember ever hearing him sing was like his opening for when he hosted the Oscars. But
okay,
so this might be my first time actually seeing him in a produced product singing. And yeah, he's pretty damn good at doing singing.
Right?
Did you know that, Ryan?
I did know that. Thank you, buddy.
Now you know.
Thank you, friend.
Now you know. You're welcome.
You're welcome. Thank you. So you didn't have necessarily any big laugh out louds, but what were some highlight moments for you of any of the comedy stuff outside of the blogging, or any specific lines of the blogging?
There was... I have to think of all of them. Just
to me, it's a very quotable film, but that's maybe because I've watched it a few times.
Yeah,
I think the big laugh out loud moment for me that first time, it's iconic if you've seen this before. It is the hammer is my penis line from Captain Hammer. The unnecessary need to come back and tell him that, and the line delivery from Nathan Fillion and the comedic timing of it is a standout moment for me and many people who have watched this. That's one of my go-tos. There's so many lines in this that I have forgotten are from this. Such as I have used, I don't know how many times in my life, to, like I say, to the point in which I have forgotten that it's from this, which is the status is not quo, is a line I have said a lot.
That was right there in the beginning as well, wasn't it? Yeah.
That's very, very early on. The status is not quo. Yeah, that's a classic. A little gag that I've always loved, and my sister and I love this gag. We always talk about it, which is Moist. Talking about how he went on a date with Bait and Switch and how he thought he was going to get with Bait. And he was really disappointed.
See, the first time round, that kind of went over my head. I was just like, oh, okay, he seems like a bit of a self-centered guy. But then the second time around, I'm like, oh, okay, I get it now.
Yeah. And I love the dumb gags, such as I really love the cowboy guys that always exist on the edge of the frame. And did you love the little gag with them in the final sequence where they only exist at the door frame? Yeah. And they've got their beers and they're partying, but they're in unison with one another.
Yeah.
I love that. It's one of my, whenever I think of the movie, it's one of the things I think of is that dumb visual gag in which it's unneeded. And I love it to bits. Yeah. Those are some highlights. Also, just every Captain Hammer moment ever. He's a perfect comedy character for me. He's just such a piece of shit. And Nathan Fillion plays the role with this Bruce Campbell-like ease, where Bruce Campbell from the Evil Dead movies is like this charming, effortless, handsome-ish but smug pretty boy fuckhead, and I get that from Nathan Fillion a lot too.
He's got the voice down too. Yeah.
Oh yes, he's got that kind of. Yeah, he's got that down a lot. So yeah, I those are some of my personal highlights. But yeah, keep going with the stuff you want to go on about with this. If there's any other jokes or just any other type of things you want to dive into with this, because after all, this is your first time. I'm very keen to hear it, because this is your first time seeing a product that was made all those years ago. You're coming at it now, 2022. You don't have any affection for Joss Whedon or the superhero landscape or any of that. So I'm just wanting to really hear what you got out of this.
One blog moment that did have a cut in it was you know which one I'm talking to, where he just finished one of his blogs talking about like, oh, this is what I'm gonna do next.
This is my plan.
And then he comes back clearly a little bit rattled. He's like, so turns out that the police and Captain Hammer were, are one of my viewers, and they were completely prepared for my plan.
And he threw a car at my head.
Yeah.
It's great. It's great because it's making fun of the stupid conceit of the movie, which is, why would a supervillain have a public blog channel in which the police and the hero could watch it?
Yeah, and the cut makes sense because it's a different blog.
Yep, and he's bruised on the eye, and he's like blinking odd because he's like dazed and confused from like he got a car thrown at his head. Yeah. Any musical numbers standing out to you?
I think the one that sticks with me the most is My Eyes.
Yeah?
Yep, from the very beginning of the second act.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's just been stuck in my head since I watched it.
I think that's my sister's favorite one as well, honestly. I'm a big fan of Slipping, the one in which he's frozen Captain Hammer and he's singing to the crowd and to us about how his disguise is slipping, and they're all basically it's his "your sheeple" speech.
Yeah,
I like that one a lot. It has I like the menace of it. I like the music of it. I like the humor in that one too. It manages to slip some in there. I do very much love anarchy that I run is a line that he says. Like, one of the things he wants is anarchy that I run, and it's like, you can't do that. But that's not how that works, buddy. And when he walks over to the journalist and corrects out the spell Dr. Horrible, it's two R's actually. I love that. And I'm a big fan of Man's Gotta Do. A man's gotta do what a man.
Is that when we first see Captain Hammer? Yeah.
And I love the use, because that's the real first song, right? That has the use of multiple people's lyrics on top of each other.
That was really good at the very end of it.
Yeah.
Like these two are having like a romantic, movie superhero moment, and this villain character who is our actual main character is like pointing out all the inconsistencies, the falsehoods.
He threw you in the garbage. Like, are you watching the same heist or what? I love that. And I you know me, man. I am a big fan of super smug, machismo, arrogant comedy characters, and the introduction of Captain Hammer, because you've been told about Captain Hammer at this point. You've been told.
He's the actual arch nemesis, not Johnny Snow or whatever the name is.
Yeah. And you get told about Captain Hammer, and then you see Captain Hammer. Like, he immediately jumps in, and he's doing all the poses, and he's got the smug face, and he looks directly at the camera. Like, he does that classic, their head turns, and he looks directly at the camera to deliver a line. That's my shit in comedies. I love that type of shit. You know this. I know this. So that song has to stand out for me as a personal favorite as well, just because it is a marvelous introduction to what will be the antagonist of this film. I'm going to keep calling it a film. I don't care. That's one of those things. So you watch this the two times over, because it does proceed to unfold itself into being more of a sad, dramatic,
tragic comedy,
piece. How do you feel about that overall now that you've digested this twice? How do you feel about how it morphs into being that?
I do appreciate it a lot more that I gave it the second chance. I've said that already. Because you have this character who, all of this kind of went, again, like his motives and stuff like that, I was just dismissing the first time he was talking about it. But it's right there from the beginning. The world is messed up. He wants the status quo to be changed. And he's consistently bringing those things up throughout the whole thing. about how essentially he's not necessarily inherently evil, but he's using evil as his tool of choice to try and make change in the world. And then in the end, like, he becomes true evil by doing all the things that he did end up doing, and he's pulling it off, you know, publicly and to all the other people, but inside, like, he's just completely dead.
He's numb.
He's numb.
He's sad. He sings "I'm fine" in the most like
I
not
think
fine.
I'm fine.
Yeah, I think I'm fine. I remember that being a surprise gut punch in My Little Comedy musical, where he accidentally kills the girl of his dreams. It's interesting because he's consistent at being inconsistent in the movie with his motives, because the whole thing is he wants to change the status quo. He wants to do this, but he has no actual idea of what any of that means. He's just and this is how it's aged in an interesting way to me. He's an angry man who doesn't know how to direct that anger towards something beneficial. He just knows that he's upset with how things are. He's angry that he's not the center of attention, and he's using this cartoonish League of Evil as this aspirational thing to become, because he wants to fit in and he wants a place in the world. He wants to change the world, but he doesn't actually know what he wants in what that actually means.
I think he has a line acknowledging that near the end, right?
Yeah. And it's all this thing of him wanting change is a falsehood. He says that in one of the songs where he's like, what he wants is power and money. Oh, and social change. Right? Anarchy that I run. It's my turn. It's Dr. Horrible's turn now. That's what he wants. He wants his time to be in the eye and to be important, but it comes at a terrible, terrible price. And I think that's really fascinating because he is our central character. Inherently, you want to like him. Just as a central character, you're following in the thing. He's played by Neil Patrick Harris, who's a charming fellow, wouldn't you agree?
Mm-hmm.
But Neil Patrick Harris doesn't not shy away. He doesn't shy away from how this guy's a weird creep who's antisocial and an asshole. But because he's our central character and we're viewing this through the lens of him being our thrusting point, you're pushing aside those things that we've mentioned because you want him to get what he wants. You want him to have a happy ending. You want him to get the girl. But he doesn't like the girl. He doesn't care about what she cares about. He doesn't respect her. He just wants her because he just wants. He doesn't even know necessarily what he wants, but he knows he wants things. And then in the end, he gets a tragic ending because it is that thing of he's desiring things that he probably shouldn't be desiring, and it punishes him, and he's trapped in that in the end, right? She dies, and he becomes the Dr. Horrible he was afraid of becoming. He didn't want to kill people, but now he's killing people, and he's fine with it. He's fine with it. But it's killed him on the inside, and he's wearing this now awesome red suit. He's got this exterior of what it is to be a villain, but now he actually understands the repercussions of what it is to be this thing. It reminds me very much of you and I watched Babylon 5.
Mm-hmm.
And it reminds me very much of one of the central characters in that show thinks that they want a certain thing, and then they get it, and it's the most horrible thing, and they have to suffer that for the rest of the show. And they just live in this torment of what they've got, but that's what they've got.
And their clothes change color.
And they change color clothes. That's it. You got it.
To be honest, the very first thing I thought was Lemonade Joe, where it's like, this is the outfit of an Avenger.
Yeah, right. But I appreciate on how it earns the ending there, because it does make you reflect back and make you want to watch back that Billy / Dr. Horrible, he brought it on himself. Right? This isn't like, oh, Captain Hammer made him do this and it became... No, all of these things are building up on the negative traits of the character, biting him in the ass. Hence, it's a good tragedy story, because a good tragedy story in a narrative, that's what you want from that, especially of this variety.
The one element that I was catching on to even before, I realized to myself, like, I need to watch it again, was... in their first proper conversational interaction between Billy and Penny, you know, where he's working the remote control and she's talking to him, it's essentially the second scene of the whole thing.
Yeah.
And what we get out of the first scene is, you know, he is an aspiring villain who really wants a prestigious, you know, position, good word. But also he wants the girl. And you've got these two things, and it's like, okay.
And he has an idealized version of the girl.
Yes, but even before that point, these are the two objectives, and they're kind of mutually exclusive. Like, he doesn't want to become the supervillain to get the girl, and he doesn't need the girl to become the supervillain. So how is this story kind of going to balance these two things? Is it going to be a story of, like, choosing between the career and love? Like, that's, again, because I wasn't fully on board with what was going on, I was thinking that maybe that's going to be the story. And so, you know, immediately, first scene, really wants the girl. Second scene, he's interacting with the girl, and he's being, obviously he's, you know, stressed because he's doing something, but like his attitude is really kind of dismissive towards her.
Because what we learn here is they've never interacted before properly. They've never spoken.
Yeah.
So he doesn't know anything about her. He just sees a pretty girl, and he's projected all of these things onto her. The dancing in the freeze race. These are all his projections. So now we're seeing the real thing, and she's the opposite of what he stands for. And so he rejects it.
Yeah, and even his words after she leaves, it's like, she finally talked to me. Why did it have to be now, though? And it was almost like, oh, you should be more happy about this. That's what I was kind of expecting a bit more of. Like, I thought there was going to be a bit more of a clash there, but it was, just oddly negative.
Yeah.
Even though he's happy about it on some level.
Yeah, well, that's what makes a great character. That's what makes him an interesting character, and characters like this interesting, especially when you're following them as your protagonist. Because obviously, he's a bad person. You could argue he's kind of got incel behavior within him.
Yeah, I was waiting for that to be brought up. Yeah.
Yeah, you could argue that he
Captain Chad.
Yeah, Captain Chad. You can argue all of those things, but to actually frame him as the person you're following, it's a fascinating thing because we see he has wants, needs, desires, and aspirations, and he wants to be happy. He wants to be happy, but he isn't. He's an angry and sad person. And so from a narrative, you have to follow that to its logical progression. So he's this angry, bitter, sad person, but he wants to be not good, but he wants to be a villain, but also he doesn't want to pull the trigger on what that actually means. As we see with Moist is more of a villain than he is. Moist is more gung-ho about murdering people.
Yeah, he's like, oh, you want to kill a kid or maybe this old lady?
Right?
Yeah.
And he's grossed out by this notion. He's like, well, what do you think you are, man? What do you think you are? You're in this weird, awkward position. And so when he has that scene with Penny, who is a character that is good. She's all the virtues that he does not have. He doesn't like that because he doesn't agree with it. And so what do you have in common with her? Nothing. And he proceeds never to try and have anything in common with her. He never tries to engage with her on a person-to-person level. He just wants her because he's had this idea, this goal in his brain. But it doesn't fit. And now Captain Hammer's got it. So now the goal has changed of, now my nemesis has the girl. I have to get the girl back. I have to stop him from having the girl. It's like, that's bad, right? On a real world level, that's not good. That's why he's a bad person. But you're so engrossed in the fun of hanging around Neil Patrick Harris and hanging around Dr. Horrible and his songs and seeing him become a villain and all that, that you kind of gloss over it a little, perhaps, but he doesn't respect Penny on a real person level. He's just as bad as Captain Hammer when it comes to her. Like, both of them just objectify her. That's what they have for her. And I guess that's a critique I have of this, and many people, is Penny's not a character. She's an object that they are pursuing and are using in the script and using in the story. And I don't know, it was always bugged me when I watched it back in the day. It bugs me now that it's bad that when she dies, I have an emotional reaction only because of Dr. Horrible, only because of Billy. I don't actually care about her. And when she sings songs and when she has lines of dialogue, there's this sensation that comes over me because they haven't done a really good job of actually deepening her as a character and giving her agency of any sort that I just disengage on a level. What do you feel about all of that stuff? Because I was talking a bit there and I see you kind of eyes darting around and stroking the chin and giving me these looks like, I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I definitely, our main character has the things that you were saying about, his idealized version of her, and it being, the same as, I almost call him Chad.
Captain Hammer.
Captain Hammer's attitude towards her. With Captain Hammer, it's a lot more overt and spelt out. Oh, hey, maybe there was like an initial attraction for like a one-time thing, but then once I watched your blog and realized, oh, girl of your dreams, well, now I'm going to do it just to spite you. Like at that point, it's very clear that like, okay, you are just in it for a malicious reason, even if, the thing that you do as part of this is going to help homeless people. With Dr. Horrible, Billy, I feel like there was a bit more of a genuineness to it because it's a guy who we could probably guess has never really had a relationship before and is aspiring to one. And he does clearly have some sort of feeling inside, whether it is, completely negative or not. I know there's a lot of like little implications that he's been stalking her because like the photo that he has like leaves around the frame and stuff like that.
And the whole song where he's stalking them on dates.
Yes. But
and he's in the background of shots.
True. But there's also, a bunch of scenes of them interacting and there is, some sort of tension going on there that I feel like, okay, there is a potential for something to bloom from here, whether it's, toxic or not.
Yes.
And they even have like a song together. It's like the Chin Up, I forget the name.
Yeah.
Billy Buddy. Yeah. Where, something is happening. And I see it more, again, going back to that tragedy idea of if he interacted with her in, different ways and would have been a bit more genuinely reaching for a relationship, I feel like he could have avoided the fate that it leads to. And you even get like the scene of So They Say, where like she's holding the two frozen yogurts, someone walks in, she looks back.
Yeah, exactly.
Which I missed on my first time, so it was nice to see again. And it's just, again, going back to the tragedy of because he is reaching for the super villainy stuff and all of his angst, he's not making the right moves, and it leads him to the sad conclusion.
Of course, all of that is completely true and valid. I 100% understand that as well. I think there's some interesting kernels of thought there, such as Captain Hammer makes it overt that he's doing this as a malicious tactic against Dr. Horrible, against Billy. And how does Billy respond to that? With malicious intent as well. That's what I mean. Like he is not trying to change to be a better person, to actually connect with Penny. After a certain point, it is to screw over Captain Hammer, to kill Captain Hammer and get the girl, instead of actually caring about the girl in any way, shape, or form. You know what I mean?
Yes.
It is that tit for tat. His ego got bruised. That's why he goes after Captain Hammer. His ego got bruised there. That's what my reading is. And then another thing that you touch upon there that is fascinating, of when they have their scenes together, you get the sensation that there's something there. And this is both the positive and negative of this is it's because we're seeing it from his perspective.
Yes, I fully realize that there is an illusion at play there.
Yeah, exactly. And that is a positive here, because this is a story, this is a character study, this is a character story that's only for 40 minutes. That's the thing too. When people give really harsh critiques of this, I have to remind myself, and I think people should be reminded, this was something created for fun in a very short vacuum of time. And the fact that it's coherent is good on them. And the fact that we can talk this vividly about themes and stuff and about ideas and dynamics, great. But in all actuality, this was just something that a bunch of creative people wanted to make because they weren't allowed to create things at that moment. And so they got together and said, wouldn't it be funny if we did this? And then they did it, right? But there is that thing of, it is well done because this is a character study. We're focusing on this one guy. We're seeing his his strengths and weaknesses, and we may be even blind to his weaknesses upon a first viewing or at all. There are some people who would just say that, oh, he would have been perfect if he did kill Captain Hammer and he got with the girl. No, like he's got inherent flaws that he's not willing to change, right? He was never willing to change himself for her or for others, really. And then circumstances happen in which in the end he does change, but for the worse, and it hurts him. But yeah, I think there's that thing of, because Penny doesn't really get any major work done for her in comparison to Captain Hammer, in comparison to Dr. Horrible, you just have to take it at the face value that she has feelings for him too. But really, like, to her, Billy's a guy that she knows, and he's nice enough, but he is strange, and dismisses her. Like, when he dismisses her, when he's texting and doing all that stuff, she just walks away. Because she's like, oh, this guy's just too weird. I'm just going to walk away. Right? That's what she does. Because even she acknowledges, this Billy guy's a little bit weird. And in the end, I got to ask you this, though. Penny, is she a smart character to you in this story? Like, how do you perceive her from what we get? Do you think that she's we talk about like she's a character of virtues and wisdom, but like this is a movie or thing where it's commenting on the failings of those wants and hers. Like when they first interact, he has this whole thing of like, you're treating a symptom. So at the end of it, how do you feel about her and what she stood for? Do you think that she was a right and smart character, or what?
Rather than being someone of, higher intelligence or wisdom or anything like that, it sounds like a really cruel thing to begin with. But yeah,
I mean, it's a fictional character.
I know it is a fictional character.
That's right, people. It's fiction.
Yeah, but she's played by an actress, so now I'm applying that to the actress, and I'll be sending her my letter.
Okay, Felicia Day.
I won't, thank you.
Who
you
was
did a
also
good job.
Another internet, did the Guild. I don't know if you ever remember that. That was an early internet thing as well.
I remember the name, but I don't know.
So that was a reason she's here as well, so go on.
To some extent, yes, you have pointed out that she is sort of being used as a device there. Mm-hmm. And I do think that part of her characterization is a sort of, don't know if we'll use the word like the parody or an homage to, like the really pure girl. Like one of the first scenes we get of her for real, not the laundry day thing, is her on the street corner, holding out a thing, being like, could you please do this? Like, little matchstick girl or something like that. Being ignored. Almost reminds me of like beginning of Final Fantasy VII, like, the flower girl, like trying to sell flowers on this like corrupt looking street. And to that extent, it's like, okay, we're going to be playing around with the tropes and the idea of, this pure character who's optimistic, who genuinely wants good things, but doesn't really have the power to, reach for them. Mm-hmm. And what we get is when she's, hanging out with Captain Hammer and all that, the My Eyes song, she is in this good mood, this good place where she's feeling like, things are going to happen, even when she's like looking at him, like, ignoring her to talk to someone else or anything like that. And her lyrics are all about how the world is starting to wake up to goodness. And she feels like everything's going well, juxtaposed next to
Horrible,
who's miserable and singing about how he still needs to fulfill his villainous, or his, to him virtuous goal.
And in that song too, he's spurning her for not helping stop the darkness inside of him. It's like, that's her job apparently, it's one of those weird things, right?
Yeah.
And like you're saying, but later in the song, to give her credit as a character too, just to interject briefly, there are those moments where she's keenly aware that Captain Hammer's not the greatest partner, greatest guy. He's pretty okay, I guess. She's self-aware enough to know that this isn't the perfect partner, but on paper, he's good enough. Like, he's taking the interests in her stuff, even though it's obviously not full. He is helping her. He is doing the things on paper that are good. He's taking her on dates. He's listening to her.
Yes, I suppose
doing all that kind of crap. But it's not real because we know, because we're throwing Dr. Horrible, that he's a horrible monster who's an egotist. But from her perspective, she doesn't know that, but she does have the wisdom and the intelligence to know that that, like, when he's saying the stuff at the speech where it's like, not my usual type, she gives these looks like, oh, can we not?
to go back to an earlier illusion I mentioned, like, just after Captain Hammer, quote unquote, fingers here, saved her life, and they're having like that romantic song while Dr. Horrible is singing about, like, this is what's really happening. You could see that as the start of her entering the illusion of Captain Hammer. And you can kind of see the rest of it as, like, when she is embracing it and talking about her optimism versus when she is, as you're saying, like, recognizing that there are inconsistencies there. It's clear that she is wanting to embrace the illusion.
Yes, of course.
Yes.
As is everybody with Captain Hammer. Right?
Yes.
The whole town. Until he loses, and now they're all about Dr. Horrible. They just sway like that. And that's why I ask if she's an intelligent character, because there's that moment, right, where she dies. And her final lines are, don't worry, Captain Hammer will save us. And it's a dramatic irony, because Captain Hammer won't save you. You're dead. In fact, Captain Hammer technically killed you.
Yes.
He's the one who did it.
It's her dying while still embracing the illusion.
Yeah, she's holding on to what we are now learning, and we have learned throughout the thing, is the unfortunate truth that Captain Hammer is just as flawed and just as fucked up as everybody else, and in fact isn't a hero, perhaps. Maybe he is a hero in the most boilerplate way, but like she's relying on
the heroism and the heroic results that come almost feels like, collateral to, his goals.
Just because he's a hero doesn't mean he's a hero, if you know what I mean. Just because he's a superhero who's saving the day doesn't mean he's an actual good person.
Yeah.
And she's confused, like she's putting her faith in a false prophet in a way, and that's why I mean, like, it ends with the dramatic irony of, in the end, she was, as Dr. Horrible was singing and slipping, she never woke up to the fact that his disguise was slipping and that it was fake. She still held on to the hope that he would do the good thing, when in the end, out of everybody in the story, and this is what I mean, I wish if this was 10 minutes longer and they gave a little bit more to Penny, I kind of wish that they delved into the fact that she was the right one out of all of them. She was the one that was like, Dr. Horrible was dismissive and Captain Hammer didn't care either. Nobody cared about actually doing social change, as they keep saying throughout this movie, except for her.
Yeah, she actually, despite her being the weakest in the sense of, like, her capabilities, like, she was actually, her trying to treat the symptom was her doing something in her own way.
She was, in fact, the hero that the people needed. She was the one that was actually willing to help others without a selfish goal in mind. It was for the fact of, these people need help and we should actually try to change the world. Well, Captain Hammer, he's just taking it for the glory and to get pussy. And Dr. Horrible wants to completely upend that for no real goal other than his own ego as well. And so in the end, when she is left with Captain Hammer will save us, it is that thing of, in a way, she's sold out on her values in a little way of, in the end, she thinks, oh, Captain Hammer will save it. Captain Hammer will do the right thing. It's like, no, you were doing the right thing. You had to believe in yourself. But no, in the end, she's dead and she's the fridged girl that helps the hero, that informs the story. But no, I think it's, I don't want to go too heavy into that kind of stuff, because that's the thing too, like, it's fascinating that we have this 40-minute thing here, and I feel like we're only just scratching the surface of things that we can talk about with it. You know what I mean? Like, we've barely talked about the songs. There's other comedy things we could talk about, how this was made. Hence, I was compelled to want to talk about it on the podcast, because to me, this has the juice, the meat of what we would discuss with any other movie we do here. But
I think so far we have basically done Pictures Powwow.
But this is an internet thing that was broken up into 3 parts and won an Emmy, even though it wasn't a TV thing, and got nominated. And it was like, where does this fit for you, like, in terms of that? Because to me, when I also think of internet things, this doesn't fit that either. When I think of what an internet film is, this doesn't really fit that mold to me either. This, to me, comes across as a short film that was just broken up into 3 parts on the internet because you could only upload so many minutes to those sites back in the day instead of just putting it all at once. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
When I look at this, that's how many YouTube comments, many people just, oh, it's a film. It's just a film. I can't call this a mini series or a TV show or an internet show proper. What do you think about that?
I guess, yeah, it would fall under this sort of like web video umbrella. It's the type of content, it is content that you would find primarily on the internet. Yeah, I'd struggle to call it a film or a short film. I almost think of it in a weird way, because this is a live action thing that you have to go to, but almost feels like a theater play, because it does have, the 3-act structure, and, but between every 14 minutes you get like quick credits and then an opening. Almost feels like, oh yeah, I just had an intermission at the theater in Melbourne or something like that. And when it comes back, it's not necessarily like, recapping what happened, but it does in a way still reintroduce you to the story. It's like every 14 minutes you almost start from a point of zero.
Yeah. It's very fascinating. I with Dr. Horrible's sing-along blog, the comedy for me, upon revisiting it after all these years later, still hit very well. But there were points where I was reminded how we've changed since 2007 and 8. If you catch my drift, how did you feel about that in terms of like this being a product from the past, this being a comedy from the past? Because whenever we've done comedies from our youth, we talk about that, how they don't make things like this, or these type of jokes, or these words don't even get used anymore. Did you have that at all when you were viewing this, or was this just one of those things where you were like, oh, this still feels fresh today, like this is just something that could be dead today?
Well, you know me, I'm not too into like the superhero films or the MCU or anything like that, but I have seen a couple of them, especially from earlier. Like I have seen Avengers, which is Joss Whedon kind of thing, and I could definitely see the comparison in the humor from that to this. Like even in those films, they're the ones that were comedies, maybe Guardians of the Galaxy being an exception. The comedy was never really something I really liked, and this kind of felt like, the same sort of comedy there, like the line about the hammer is my penis thing. It's like, oh yeah, there is obviously explaining the joke is a certain type of comedy, and it feels like something that I would have seen in the Avengers or something like that.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I found it dated in parts. Specifically, I find it so, it's just, I've told, I may use an offensive term, people, but in my lifetime, I don't know when tard and retard became like that hard line, you can't say that anymore type of, I know it is, but there was, in my youth, as we see here in this, that kind of flippancy about that and calling people those kind of offhanded derogatory terms in a comedic setting like this.
Big Fat Liar and Kangaroo Jack also had like, retard, Ricky Retardo.
Yeah, and Superbad, a great example of a movie that had so much offensive stuff that you're like, oh boy, like people today would lose their shit about this. But like, it was the times. And I think that's important to note down that this was the times. Like, even stuff as him saying balls at the end of one of the acts there, right? That was so of its era. Balls. I remember people talking like how people do in this, certain phrases, certain words, certain insults to one another that you don't see as often in media today, of written variety media today. And so I was noting that down, and it's not as this is a critique. It's not me saying that means it's bad. It's more pointing at the fact that this is a thing that was made at a period of time that we are no longer in. If this was made today, I don't think they would do the things that they did here in that manner. They would use different type of insults and different words, and I don't know if they would be as I don't know how to really get at it, because it's like once I say this, I know that there's a contradiction here. You could go, no, actually. But there's this thing of me in my brain where I don't feel as if this was made today, they would just be as blatantly willing to make characters as obnoxious pieces of shit.
I was going to say something similar. You mentioned already the comparison to like, incel, and, I mentioned like, oh yeah, the virgin and the chat and stuff like that. Definitely, I feel like it was more of a 2010s decade kind of thing where we started really talking about the word toxicity and toxic masculinity and things like that. And because this is something from, later in the 2000s, where I'm not even sure if that term existed at all yet, or if it was just coming around, but definitely in the modern, progressive status quo consciousness, that is a concept that we all have some sort of understanding with, especially those of us of a younger generation. I feel like if this thing was made a bit more in the 2010s, that would be a bit more of a present thing that might be pointed out a bit more. Yeah. In a weird way, this film almost feels a little ahead of its time in that, that wasn't in our consciousnesses, but there is a really clear example of it happening here.
Yeah, there is a definite outline of it here, especially with the So They Say song, which really comments upon that type of like, next up, who's gay? And that kind of, we're pointing at how arrogantly dismissive we are of people, such as when Penny dies, they just call what's her name in the paper, or So They Say again, we have a problem with her, this is his hair. Like the fan, I also like that commentary too of the fangirl, fan culture, sheeple, whatever mentality that is underlying this, of they all love Captain Hammer. And they like her. They should like her as well. She's good too because hey, she's with Captain Hammer, but we do have a problem with her, by the way, because she's taking our ideal spot of us being her, so we don't like her.
Yes, we will actively do the weird stuff.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I love that. But to kind of get out of those kind of heavy things, I just kind of want to get back into, because this is a fun thing to me. It's like this is just fun. I don't think about Dr. Horrible too deeply like we are doing right now. For the podcast, this is what we do. But when I watch it, I just enjoy the performances. We got to remember, too, that Neil Patrick Harris was really striking gold at this period of time. This was, we had Harold and Kumar. We had How I Met Your Mother around this time. And we had this. This was like a trifecta of changing people or even waking people up about Neil Patrick Harris and what a talent he is, what a comedic performer is, and what a charming guy he comes across as. And obviously, I can't remember where in the timeline this is, but eventually also Neil Patrick Harris would come out of the closet and reveal that he's gay, and then that was a real big shift in my youth. I remember so vividly how that was a big turning point where there was this real big acceptance of that, which was unusual because at that time he was playing like Barney Stinson, the ladies, but he was gay, and it was a big thing that I remember happening at the time that was made people like Neil Patrick Harris more, that he was brave enough and he actually came out and was actually championing these things, and he has a husband that he met on How I Met Your Mother, and they have a kid, and they have all these Halloween photos. That there was this real, at this period of time, building up this pendulum swing of appreciation for Neil Patrick Harris, who was a likable former child star who kind of was always acting. He was in Starship Troopers, kind of faded into obscurity, and then around this time, you couldn't avoid the guy. Do you remember that?
Vaguely. Like I said, I didn't really engage in too much of his media.
But you know of it. Like, Neil Patrick Harris.
Yeah, I know. But How I Met Your Mother, he was a child star. Doogie Howser.
Yeah, Doogie Howser, Starship Troopers he was in.
Yep.
And
he was a gay icon because, like you said.
Harold and Kumar, those movies he was in as himself. Like an evil version. Like in the first, I think, 1 or 2 movies, he was, what if Neil Patrick Harris was like a crazy drug addict ladies man, and then in one of the other ones they lean into the fact that he's gay now? Like, I have to lean into that.
See, I have a copy of the first one. I never watched it. I didn't know he was in them.
He's the best part.
He's the best. Okay.
I mean, I actually don't mind those movies. They're pretty good. I have a fun time with them, but he is genuinely like, oh wow, Neil Patrick Harris, he's doing everything he's doing everything he kind of want him to do in those. And to me, this is what I enjoy about the movie is you have these people like Neil Patrick Harris who is he's carrying it. He can sing, he can dance, he can act, he can do the comedy. He's a handsome guy, but also he can come across as like a dweeby guy. Like when he's Billy, he really does come across as as a real life kind of awkward, introverted person that you could meet on the streets. But then also it's like he's handsome Neil Patrick Harris as well. He could do that. And then Nathan Fillion. Do you have any connection with Nathan Fillion? Do you know Captain Hammer, Nathan Fillion, from anything at all?
I don't know, actually. I know it's one of those things where I know the name, but I wouldn't be able to pick out what he was from.
Well, he was for Firefly was a big deal, which got a film, Serenity. He was in a short fan-made film of a Uncharted fan-made film where he played Nathan Drake. And people are still very upset now with the new Uncharted film that he did not get to be Nathan Drake. Yeah, everyone's like, this guy is clearly Nathan Drake. And, and you watch a short film and you're like, no, this guy is Nathan Drake.
Yeah, our friend Oliver was telling me the other day, it was like a week ago, about how, because our other friend Stefan saw the Uncharted movie and he was like, oh yeah, I thought it was okay. You don't know anything about Uncharted, but what do you guys think? And I mentioned like, oh, I know that a lot of people think that the casting of that film is basically a punchline, and Oliver came in saying like, oh yeah, anyone other than Nathan Fillion as Nathan Drake is completely unacceptable. And I just thought that was like, oh, because he like looks like him, I guess.
No,
I didn't know about the short film.
I'll show you the short film when we're done. It's fucking fun. And he's very funny. He's very charming. He does have, as I said, has that Bruce Campbell thing where you look at him and you go, you look like a parody of a leading man guy. Because I just kept saying this to my wife, Rachel. I said, do you find him genuinely sexy and attractive? And she's like, oh, here? Yeah, he's good. Yeah. And I just went, I can never find him that way because he always comes across as like the spoof parody version of the handsome leading actor.
I was going to say, yeah, similar to how Penny in this was like, you know, the parody or archetypal, you know, pure person. He was like very archetypal hero man. Like as soon as he, you know, landed on the thing, just looking at him, like, oh yeah, this is that archetype that you like, the sort of Captain Quarky, like, yes, I'm the hero.
Yeah, right. I love Nathan Fillion. I think he's very funny. He's very charming. He's in those Destiny games. Apparently, he plays like this. He basically plays the Nathan Fillion charming rogue guy, but he's like a robot guy, and I don't know much about those Destiny games, but I do know that he's the fan favorite character because he's fun, and that's what you want. There are some actors, we've talked about this on the pod so many times, you just want them to do the thing that they do, and here he is doing the thing that he does. He's just delivering the smarmy lines and the one-liners and doing the physical. I mean, one of my favorite bits is the I hate the homeless, switches cards, ness problem of this city. It was just so good. I wanted to ask, I don't know if you got any reaction because you said you didn't really laugh out loud too much, but there's this one gag that's so bizarre that I go, this is something Bartek would do himself in a production or would find amusing, which is when he's unfrozen from the freeze ray and he grabs the death ray or whatever, and he just does this big out of nowhere like operatic like, oh, the music swells, then it cuts off immediately. I always think of you when I see that. I'm like, oh, this feels like something Bartek would want in a production. It's like, could we have a character just suddenly do this and it cut off for no reason? It's one of those things where I just smile and nod and it makes me think of you. I don't know if you're remembering this moment by any chance.
A little bit.
It's just this weird moment. It's like 2 seconds. It's just, he walks over and Dr. Horrible's on the ground and he just goes, ah! And then it just cuts off like this operatic music and it's just done. And he's like, all right, I'm going to kill you now with your own death ray. Such a piece of shit. What did you think about how he ended Captain Hammer where he felt pain?
It was like a little interesting thing of like, oh, clearly this is a character who's never felt pain. He had this, you know, guard up, this immunity, and as soon as he felt it, it just like completely broke his psyche. It's like, yeah, I guess this is how you would beat someone like that. Like, I know Superman has his like weakness of the kryptonite, but this guy clearly doesn't.
Yeah, I was saying this jokingly, but I mean this genuinely. In the matter of the 3 parts and 40 minutes, this does a better job deconstructing why you should not have a Superman in your universe being this beacon that people attach themselves to than any of those Zack Snyder Superman films. What do you think about it? I mean, you've seen those.
I've seen 2 of the same 2 as you, though, I guess.
Yes. No. You've seen the director's cut of one of those, which is longer and boring.
Well, I can't comment on it being more boring, but I certainly don't remember anything about it.
Yeah, this is an interesting little project that this was made. I find it a fascinating relic of the past, Dr. Horrible. We have obviously the conversation to be brought up. Joss Whedon created this. We've mentioned it before. It's always a tug of war with death of the author, isn't it? Because in case you don't know, Joss Whedon has been dragged through the coals and accused of many, many bad things over his career, very misogynistic things, maybe a bit physical altercations with actors and actresses, fired an actress because she was pregnant, all these horrible things.
Okay.
He's had a very tough time. Like most recently, the Justice League, when he did Justice League, that was already a dog move on his part. I don't want to go too heavy into it, but I'm happy that Zack Snyder got his director's cut. I'll never watch it, but on principle, a guy filmed pretty much most of the entire movie, had to leave a project because of a very tragic reasoning, and then they got Joss Whedon, who made the Avengers, to just basically shit all over and redo a film. I think that's, on a moral level, reprehensible, but apparently he was very bad on that movie too. The most recent thing of that was apparently the reason why Wonder Woman didn't give a good performance in that movie was he's like, she couldn't understand anything I was saying. English isn't her first language. And her response was, oh no, I understood what he was saying. Oh no, I understood exactly what he was saying.
She was in, Deep Rising. She knows what he's saying.
Gal Gadot?
She wasn't Deep Rising, right?
No. You're thinking of Famke Jensen.
I think
was in X-Men.
I think it's because we talked about her in that episode.
Yeah, maybe. But
I think Sam brought her
and
up.
then obviously he had some stuff too with the guy who played Cyborg. There's a whole can of worms. But that is the thing. Joss Whedon is this big figure when we grew up in our lives. There's obviously, even if you didn't encounter his work, you know about Buffy.
Yes.
You know about his Avengers movies. If you haven't seen them, you at least know of Firefly or something like that. He was definitely a big figure and definitely shaped the landscape of what we see today with storytelling and structure. I mean, one of the things I find interesting, obviously, death of the author is easy to say, but it's actually harder to apply, because we've talked about that. We say death of the author, but let's be honest, we've said this too. It's easy to say, oh, if I don't like the guy, then I'll apply death of the author. But then how many times do you not apply that to a piece of work that you like, to also a person who creates it that you like? We talked about movies on this podcast where we talk about the person who created it and their ethos and how we attach it to this. It's a tricky thing, because I think about that when I watch this. There are going to be people who don't want to watch Dr. Horrible because there's lots of those disturbing things that we talked about in this, like the incel-y things. All these kind of things are things that Joss Whedon has done in real life. So it's like, is this actually him critiquing and commenting on that, or is this just naturally his thing in there? And it becomes this whole murky thing. But I wanted to raise that because there's going to be people who are thinking that when we're talking about like Joss Whedon's work, there's that element there. He's been critiqued on many things that are problematic in his scripts that turn up time and time again, where you go, this is no longer you just critiquing the problem, but you're just doing the problem in your work as well. I know you don't have a major attachment to him in any way.
Pretty much not at all.
But I wanted to comment on, you said it, you've watched some superhero movies, you're not a huge fan of them, but you've seen the Avengers.
Mm-hmm.
And this definitely has some of that vibe to it. The humor.
Yes. Yeah.
Joss Whedon, the success of the Avengers has basically been the blueprint for how every one of those superhero movies are made. That kind of, we can't have a serious moment, we have to undercut it with a joke. And that's here, right? You have we kind of, and then no, we undercut it with a joke. But this is overtly like a comedy, the whole thing.
Yeah. As much as, the hammer's my penis thing wasn't, the huge laugh for me. Like, I could definitely see like, oh yeah, that's it fits with what the product is. Yeah.
Yes. But I wanted to get your kind of takes a little bit further on how you view Dr. Horrible being this little thing that existed before the guy who created Dr. Horrible kind of stamped the mold on what the real superhero products are. Like, what do you think about that? Isn't this like an interesting little anomaly to think about, that this little comedic spoof satire on what superhero things were is made by the guy who would now kind of cement what we have been enduring the last, 10 years?
Definitely way earlier in the episode when you were talking about how, oh man, this is the type of quality that you can get on an online thing. It was being undercut in my head, but but it's by the Avengers guy, by the guy who already did Buffy, who was super rich and had access to Neil Patrick Harris and Fillion and all that. So yeah, it is.
I mentioned that was an outlying thing, all those things as the context.
Yeah, it is interesting though that maybe I don't know how much this would have influenced like internet content in general, but yeah, definitely as a stepping stone towards the Avengers, you know, this is something you'd have to mention.
Yeah,
because it's only like 4 years before the Avengers, I believe.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? I don't know how to feel about it because I'm not a huge fan of the Avengers, that film. I've never been really fine with it. I'm not a huge lover of it. But I feel this weird rift with Dr. Horrible because the Avengers exist, where there's this guy who clearly understands what one can make fun of with the superhero things. There's this satirical nature. It's this understanding of the flaws and foibles and how can we tinker around and play with it, and then proceeds to mainstream those things in a way that has become absolutely intolerable for me. I'm not a hater of the MCU per se, but I am very tired. And so I feel weird about it in retrospect. This still holds up as its own thing, of course. As I'm saying, this isn't a Dr. Horrible shit because he made the Avengers, but there is that thing in my brain.
Speaking of brains, I don't know what was going into mine, but until you just mentioned like earlier on in that thing about like, you know, this has a superhero, Avengers are superheroes, somehow that just didn't connect in my head.
Right?
It's just like, now it's like, oh wait, yeah.
Right?
Yeah, this is interesting. Because this is very, again, outlier. It is Joss Whedon, rich guy, access to great celebrities. It is pretty indie in tone.
Yes.
Compared to the big mainstream thing, which even though I had no attachment to it, I'm like, oh, apparently this Avengers thing is going to be a really big deal.
Right?
Yeah. Like I remember way back, again, jumping back to something we mentioned earlier, Nostalgia Critic, he once reviewed the Avengers film that we did on Unappreciated Masterpieces, and he began with a joke of like, oh yeah, it's the big awaited Avengers film, and I was like, I have no idea what you're talking about, but okay. And then when that film was actually made, the 2012 one, I'm like, oh, this is that thing Nostalgia Critic was talking about.
Right.
Apparently this is a big deal.
Right. But even though you and I don't engage in superhero media all that much, it is very invasive in our lives.
A lot of the people that we know do engage in it quite heavily.
And I'm not going to say it's just Joss Whedon. We have Jon Favreau, we have Kevin Feige, we have Zack Snyder, we have Christopher Nolan. There's all these people, of course. But he's a big part of it. He's a big part of how they're structured, script-wise and tonally. So do you see where I'm having that struggle here, where the guy who's in a way, in part, made the problem that I have with the current landscape of movies and superhero genre was at one point able to kind of directly poke fun at it and say it's kind of silly and look at me have fun with it. Do you know what I mean? It's just this thing where it's kind of, I get frustrated where it's just like, I wish you kind of didn't, man.
You know, a lot of, I thought this about halfway through the episode at this point, but it's coming back to me now. It's very similar to what you were talking about with going back to your previous choice, Mad Max, where, you know, that was also a film about a guy who was struggling not to reach a certain conclusion and then tragically led to that conclusion. And then also, as you say, the franchise later shaped so much of post-apocalyptic Western media and has made you tired. It's an interesting juxtaposition.
Is it worth it?
Yeah.
Is my question. And here's the difference, though. George Miller just made Mad Max movies, and that was it.
Well, happy feet.
And no, what I mean is he just made those movies, and then it's not like then he proceeded to make a mega blockbuster post-apocalypse movie that then defined the genre, not just genre, cinema landscape for a decade or more. It's not like he did that. He just made 3 movies over a good period of time that then inspired B movies that you didn't have to watch and nobody has to talk to you about. Like, I can't escape the invasive nature of superhero movies, no matter how much I try. And it's not that, again, I don't have as much of a disdain for them as others, and I like them, and I would be far more engaged in watching them than you are, per se. That's not to say you hate them, but you just have no real interest in them. You go, oh, if someone makes me watch one, fine, but you're not edging up to watch the Daredevil TV show or any of that.
In general, I hope this has come across in, you know, over the years doing the podcast, but if I hear a movie is good, I'm definitely going to be interested. Like, when you were like, oh, Spider-Verse is a good movie, it's like, let's check it out.
Yeah, let's check it out.
And it was great.
Logan's a good movie. I would recommend that one too.
Then I should watch Logan.
Then you should watch Logan. Like, there's these things, but it is very much like,
I guess it's because I'm expecting it to be like, the thing you're tired of, and the thing that I've seen. I'm like, oh yeah, I don't really.
You
want
saw
more of
Black
that.
Panther, and you were like, "That's enough."
I saw Black Panther because a person cancelled and said, "I'll give my ticket to Bartek," and I was like, "Well, free movie, I guess."
Yeah, and you love it so much, Black Panther.
I was like, I don't get it. I don't get it.
But I don't know if there's much else to kind of dive into here. It's a very interesting project nonetheless. I feel like we've really interrogated it pretty well. Anything you want to touch upon, any scenes or themes or outside things you want to talk about here?
Outside thing, yes. I want to talk a little bit about the commentary.
Yes. Yes, of course.
Not sure how to approach this, but let me just ask you, like, have you listened to the commentary?
I didn't listen to it on this one, but I have in the past.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And do you like it?
I thought it was interesting. Why? Why do you say this? Did you get a chance?
You've listened to the whole thing, right?
Yes.
Okay, and so, I'll just say it. I stopped after 14 minutes. I wasn't enjoying it.
Really?
Yeah.
What happened, Bart? Walk us down your misery.
I wouldn't say misery, but
the songs weren't as good.
No, the songs.
Context, it's a musical commentary for a musical, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to watch it. And in fact, that was basically going to be my second viewing.
Yes.
But then, obviously I cancelled on that, and I was just thinking about it. It's like, okay, now I have to watch it properly a second time.
What happened?
It's more about what didn't happen.
Okay.
So obviously I heard that it was a musical commentary, and I thought that sounds like a really unique idea. Let's get into it. And obviously 14 minutes, I think it was exactly 14 minutes and 2 seconds. That was the entirety of the first act.
Uh-huh.
And she had Felicia Day had just started, Nathan Fillion is so dreamy, looking in his eyes song. And I was like, I've gone through this commentary all the way through the first act, and there has been like no commentary at all. It's just people singing, and between the singing, they're like, heightened personality, musical people, like they're like doing a real musical, and I'm like, this is not what I want. The whole first song is about like what commentaries are like, and I'm like, oh yeah, and after this song they'll
do that.
They'll like, it's like, all right, that's the first song, guys. All right, well, let's actually talk about it, and then like little giggles back and forth talking about what's happening.
Perhaps even use a song as use that in a version of a song, like when we shot this scene in a I thought, in a songy way.
Like when I heard the premise, I'm like, oh, that doesn't sound like it would work. Like they're gonna like improvise songs while talking about the movie. That doesn't sound like it would work. But I'd like to see them try to do that. But no, it was just full on, like, I won't say orchestrated, but like full on
written songs.
There's a set rhythm to it, and it's just like, okay, it's more songs by the people who did this thing, but it's not a commentary.
Yeah, it's been a little while since I've listened, and I remember that being a vibe too of, I wish that they played into the gimmick a little bit more of it being like the songs are song versions of what you would hear in a commentary track for Dr. Horrible. Like if you had a real commentary track for Dr. Horrible that was just normal, and you turn their things into songs.
Yeah.
But it is very much like, we had some fun ideas for some songs, and
the two
big fun.
Like the two acknowledgements that happened in that whole first act was when Nathan Fillion, it was the last song I heard all the way through, was singing about "I'm better than Neil." Yeah. He mentions like, "Oh, I jumped off of a moving vehicle while he's playing on his phone," and that was actually happening while he was singing. I'm like, okay, that's close, and like he's commenting on what's happening there, but like that's the closest it got.
Yeah, he could play with it more, but hey, it was there for a bit of fun. They didn't need to give you it, but they tried. They gave you something. But I understand.
Look, I definitely applaud the effort, but it's not a commentary.
Okay. Well,
as far as I listened to, like, do they stop at some point?
I can't remember, but it's mainly songs.
Like, one of my first thoughts after the first song was like, oh, maybe they just front loaded like all the songs at the beginning and then they do it for real. But I don't know. I didn't get that far.
Well, that's it. Would you recommend this?
Yeah, for sure. Again, for me, like 2 viewings was really what sold it for me. First viewing, still liked it, but I was not prepared for a podcast on it. Yeah. Definitely after the second one, I'm like, okay, we're all good.
I would say this is a very good time. Give it a watch. If you're giving this to new people, what I would recommend, group environment, put it on at the start of a movie night. That's a nice vibe.
Yeah.
It's short, it's
Little
sweet,
entree.
it's a musical. If people aren't into musicals, they may not be into this. I don't think this is going to win you over, but I think the music is good. I think the songs are good.
If you like musicals, this will certainly please you. The songs are very good. I was, singing, well, not singing along, but I was thinking about them after watching the first time.
Yeah, and so, I'm a fan of this. I recommend it. I recommended it for this, and I was glad to give it a revisit and have a look at it into a little bit more of a depth. But that is it. The recommendation for next episode is listing people's choice.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel as if we keep going back to your is he your stepbrother, half brother?
My stepbrother?
Yes, whose name is
Maciek.
I think
I
think if I'm incorrect, please forgive me.
We've done Bedazzled and we've done
Pink Floyd's The Wall. I think he recommended that.
I think so, yeah.
I saw that in our list. I want to do that because that's a musical.
Mm-hmm.
That one, I do believe, in my recollection, it's been a couple of years, is all singing, all songs, all music. This isn't.
Is it more like Tommy?
Yes.
Yeah, that was the vibe I got.
That when we did Tommy, I said if people like Pink Floyd's The Wall, you should like Tommy would be a good companion. I basically say these are good companion movies.
Mm-hmm.
And I may even watch them back to back. I don't know. I may be in that mood. Pink Floyd's The Wall. Our review will be nowhere near as good as Doug's review, but hey, we'll try, Doug. We'll try. Hey, fun fact, Nostalgia Critic. How about we watch your review and steal jokes from your review and put them in our review? Not like you've ever done that with our show. Not at all. Not saying that. I'm not saying that. That's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying if you listen to our commentary track on I'll Be Home for Christmas and then watch his review on I'll Be Home for Christmas and that's 60% of the jokes in that are from us and there was downloads from his whatever. I'm not saying any of that. That's just speculation. It's a theory. A game theory.
Now that's modern internet content.
Should we actually watch his review? No, I don't think so. I think I would kill myself, honestly.
If you say that you're going to do it, I'll do it too.
And vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
Vice versa. If we're not promising that we're going to have that, but I think perhaps not. I don't know. You haven't seen this before, correct?
I have not.
So it may be better just for you to watch it on your own and then you make your terrible opinions and then make it into a musical of your own. But
guys, high school's not that bad.
The American education system. That's it, people. You can find us on the social medias of Facebook and Twitter, Spit and Polish Presents. You can email us at
spitandpolished@gmail.com.
Yeah, you can give us your film recommendations and we'll add them to the list. We have a good list, but we could always use some more. So let us know. Follow us on those socials. You can hit us up there, email, all of that. Give us a rating and review on whatever podcast hosting platform or site you use. That is greatly appreciated. Bartek, a pleasure talking to you, my dear good friend Bartek. Great pleasure. Love talking to you. Great to be back here again in person. I know it's been a while we've been doing it, but I keep appreciating that we're here.
It's true.
We took a break, and I keep remembering
it was our longest break ever. Yeah.
And before we recorded, you kind of brought up back in the days when we didn't record in person because of the hectic nature of life we're doing in the internet. I'm like, oh boy, I'm glad I'm not doing that currently. I say this now, and then we'll see how time goes. Next week we'll be like, we're on the internet again. And we're in different rooms.
Yes, same to you, Ryan. And to our listening people, haha, April Fools, we didn't talk about a movie, but we still did a good job. Well, I don't want to say good job. I want to be
wow.
humble, but,
Did you hear that? He pranked himself there, people.
I second-guessed myself while revealing the April Fool's joke. So you can't say, oh, you didn't do a movie because it was a joke.
No, that's it.
This whole episode was a joke.
Check, please.